everybody, welcome to the first Sergeant Neutral Ranks the Resident Evil Bosses. This is my first real boss ranking episode, and as you guys have seen, this is probably going to be something that I'm going to be doing more and more just because I love bosses, I love boss rankings, and boy howdy do I have a good time with the spooky, scary ones, which is why Resident Evil, I really loved playing it as it was coming out. As you guys saw, those videos that were coming out pretty freaking fast. So, I figured, what better than to get these boss rankings out? So, essentially, the way that we're going to be breaking this down is I'm going to be talking about each of these kind of like bosses in terms of not only the gameplay, but also kind of their lore significance and, you know, just general vibe. So those are kind of my three major criteria of how exactly these bosses are going to be ranked, as well as the fact that I'm also including mini bosses. So the daughters are going to be here, Storm's going to be here, the Urious Drax, those big butcher boys are going to be around, the Varkalak Alpha also gonna be here. So, let's stop talking about the intro. Let's just get in here. So, number 12, Yurious Drax in the Butcher's area. It's an optional area, which is completely fine, but the problem with this guy in particular is that he is horrifyingly easy to cheese. It's so easy to just like shoot him, run back in, shoot him, run back in, shoot him, run back in. And it is, you know, you can just cheese that AI no problem whatsoever, and it really completely wipes out any amount of real fear or tension that could happen with this fight. I mean, in some of my subsequent playthroughs, I actually jumped in just to kind of give that general try and feel something, but unfortunately, poor Uriah's Drax in this particular instance just never did it. And it doesn't also help that aside from a few mentions here and there, he has no story significance whatsoever. He's completely optional. So that's why he's getting number 12 in my book. Number 11, Uriah's Drax by the Beneviento Grave. So the main reason that he is number 11, and I'm not even kidding, is I find he's almost totally identical to his friend that we just talked about. Really, I mean, they're exactly the same. Unfortunately, you know, neither of them have any story significance, nor do they have any real impact on the story, since both of the areas that you meet them in, you know, you only meet this Yurious Drax when you have to go back to get just a little bit of treasure. I mean, it's not even a new weapon or anything like that. It's completely optional. So in terms of story, unfortunately, they're just completely and utterly irrelevant, which really hurts their ranking. And the reason why he's a little bit ahead is because he scared the absolute hell out of me the first time we played. I had no idea what was happening, and then boom. Now, number 10. This one might be a little bit, how shall I say, controversial, because we have Yurious. Now, Yurious, the reason why I put him so far down is, as much as I love kind of the vibe he gave off, kind of the Dr. Salvatore in the beginning of Resident Evil 4, kind of that same unstoppable force, you see him once at the beginning, and then, frankly, aside from that one cutscene in front of the Four Lords, where he kind of chases you a little bit through the Lycan stronghold, you only see him here. His presence really isn't felt throughout the game. This is not to say he's a bad boss. I'm just saying that in this particular case, he's simply probably the weakest of the main mini-bosses in my mind. Just because, fundamentally, there's no real grasp to it, no groundedness to it. Even though the arena seems relatively small and claustrophobic, there's a lot of room to move around. At this point, you're fairly well kitted. It's towards the end of the game, right before kind of like the big final fight in the factory, so you've got good gear, you should have a good handle on what the ammo situation looks like. But, unfortunately, he just doesn't measure up to as powerful as the player should be at this point. So, unfortunately, good Sir Yurius, you are 10. Now, number 9, Yurious Strager. As you see, I'm kind of putting a lot of the bosses that are in the same situation in kind of similar rankings, but the reason why I like Yurious Strager in this particular instance is he is the major challenge that Chris Redfield has to face. Ultimately, you just go on a power trip, an absolutely mind-boggling power trip during Chris's entire section. I mean, you're running through, you're gunning people down, you're wiping the floor with these people. You've literally summoned the fire from God. Okay, not literally, but you know, you've been nuking everything in this village that has been doing nothing but taking and taking from Ethan Winters. And then this dude shows up and you are stuck. And if you want to talk about a claustrophobic arena, this one's about it, apart from another one that we'll talk about later. But this is absolutely brutal. Now, unfortunately, the main reason why he is so low on this list is not because of the feeling, not because of you know, the difficulty, because it is a difficult fight. In my mind, it's one of the more difficult boss fights, just because you have to constantly be moving, especially if you're using the laser guided system. You really can't get hit, otherwise it'll interrupt it. It's very stressful. It's kind of a rough time, if I'm being honest. The only problem for him, and this is where he gets docked major points in my mind, is that you don't know anything about it. I mean, I didn't even know he was related to the Yurius we just talked about. He is the elder brother and was kind of another head of the village until I actually bought his little person, his little model. And the fact that there was just that complete lack of lore, at least the lack of lore that I found on him, really hurts him, which is why he ends up at number 9. Ooh, I'm gonna get some hate for this one. I think, unfortunately for Hessenberg, he comes into a situation where I love and I fully respect the Capcom and Resident Evil 18 for swinging as big of a swing as they did with this boss fight. Because to me, ultimately, this is kind of the opposite of the past Yurius that we just talked about. Hessenberg, to me, is one of my favorite characters in this video game, and frankly, as someone who knows Resident Evil fairly well, he's one of the more entertaining and interesting characters that I've seen in pretty much any of the games. He is dynamic, he steals the scene in every single scene that he's in, but unfortunately his boss fight, even though there is a boulder punching meme reference, which is my favorite thing in the world, the boss fight itself, it puts you in a tank. There's just too much of a disconnect in my mind to the rest of Ethan Winters' like really stressful kind of environment, and especially with the fight with Sturm that just preceded it. All of a sudden you're in this open field, opening fire, really laying into it, and you're shooting these glowing red orbs. It just all of a sudden, as much as I enjoyed the character and kind of enjoyed the ambiance, the disconnect really kind of threw me out of it. It was almost too much of a shift for Ethan Winters. If Chris were the one that did it, who did it kind of at the end of his section, a real run and gun kind of like testosterone-fueled murder party, then I probably would be better off with this. But to me, unfortunately, the disconnect is really what hurt our dear sweet friend Hessenberg. Number 7, we have the Varkalak Alpha. And for me, one of the big reasons why this one is there is because of the setup. It is a completely optional mini-boss, but one of the moments that really just sent kind of a shiver down my spine is when you walk towards the fields, back towards Louisa's house. After you kill Moreau, all of a sudden you hear this massive howl, and you just see this beast stalking through the field. You don't have a clear idea of what it is, but it's massive, it's big, and it's probably going to ruin your day. So to me, in that sense, it was kind of this build up to the moment. Unfortunately, the mini-boss itself is very easily cheesable. But that being said, it's one of the most cinematic and I think most impressive of the mini bosses, which I think really helped cement this kind of feeling of helplessness that you always kind of have in the back of your mind as Ethan, especially when you're playing on kind of some of the harder difficulties. It's this moment where you're really kind of like, all right, I've really got to play it safe. I really have to be aware that this is a village that is here to kill me. Because even though it takes place later on in the game, this is a beautiful moment just to kind of remind us that, hey, it's still pretty dangerous around here. So that's why for me, it's really even though there's no real story significance, it's the full ambiance, and I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when the Varkalak Alpha's cry and howl came out. Number 6, this is another potentially contentious thing, but unfortunately, the daughters of dear Lady Dimitrescu did not really do it for me, and I think for me, purely, they were too easy. I think it's one of those moments where their characterization was great. Once again, we are now up, really starting to touch the top 6. We are on the upper half of this. We are in the upper half of this list, so things are going pretty well. These are all, and I will die on this hill. These are all good fights that are coming up. Some are better than others, obviously, because there's a ranking, but the daughters, unfortunately, were just a little bit too easy. After you kill the first daughter in the kitchen, it's a very clever way how they kind of set up how you're supposed to hurt these basically giant bug monster people. But the problem is that because you were able to knock her out so easily and so quickly, my biggest problem with that is purely in the sense that once you took her out, all the fear of all of them immediately dropped. Because you're like, oh, okay, you just make her cold and shoot her in the face a bunch, and then that's it. So the mystique of these vampire bug women coming after you all of a sudden vanishes. Their strength in that fear evaporates to the point where I don't even, it gets to the point where I remember in my initial playthrough that all of a sudden after killing her, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess we'll just go and try and kill the other two. And I didn't fear the other two. I was just kind of like, all right, we're going to check them off and keep on going on. So even though their story significance, their gameplay is solid, the difficulty wasn't quite there, which is why they have a very respectable number 6 on my list. Number 5, dear sweet Moreau. Now, this poor goober really got the short end of the stick of the Kadu infection, because my god, everybody, you've got Lady Dimitrescu, big, basically ruined the internet for like 2 months because she was such a tall step on me mommy type thing. Hessenberg can control metal with his mind. Donna can basically help people hallucinate through her studies and control puppets. Moreau can make horrifying goop show up, can't start throwing up, and is horrifyingly, disgustingly infected and absolutely repulsive. I mean, every single character that talks about Moreau talks about how gross he is, and boy does he live up to that kind of just general disappointment. You can tell he just wants to do Mother Miranda proud. That's literally all he wants to do. But unfortunately, my god, do they just not care. She hates him. If you read her notes on Moreau, Mother Miranda's notes on Moreau in her like own little lab. She rips the guy apart. She's like, just abject failure. You know, he's dumb, he's awful, he's gross. And this poor guy, really, you feel for him. So like, in terms of the story, you've got it down. You absolutely got it down. But to me, there's just something, this is to the point where, you know, frankly, these next 4 could just about be interchangeable except number 1. So to me, Moreau in this sense is just really kind of a heartbreaking situation of his boss fight is good. His boss fight is solid. You know, you've got to make sure that you get under the roofs for the acid rain. He charges at you. There's a big arena, but unfortunately, I think in this particular case, there's just not enough that I found necessarily that particularly either scary or spooky. This was just an all-out brawl, which I really respect, but in that case, there's just not quite the same anxiety that I had going later on, especially considering he is the 3rd lord that you find. You've got that you fight and find. You've got a pretty good idea of how the game works. You should be decently kitted. You know how to fight. And unfortunately, Moreau just wasn't up to the task. Mother Miranda at number 4. Mother Miranda at number 4. Now, this is something that I think really all I wanted more from her is just more. I just wanted more. I wanted to see her more in the story. I wanted to see her more operating in the background, because even Sadler in Resident Evil 4 shows up and kind of like, you know, he murders Luis, he shows up, talks shit, and then walks away. Mother Miranda just didn't have that presence, I think. So this fight just didn't, you know, she's got a great monologue. You know, you do feel for her to a certain degree. She wants to resurrect her child, which is why there's a great kind of duality between you as Ethan and Mother Miranda, fighting over their kid, fighting over their legacy, and the ways and willingness that they're willing to go to do this. And so to me, the story weight is there, but you know, the combat is solid. She has 3 distinct forms, and you know, she turns into a giant spider, she flies, she'll shoot basically giant balls at you. But the dark moment, I think, is really where I was kind of like, oh, this boss is pretty dope. Where she basically cuts the lights and you have to really prepare, sidestep, shoot her, and really get ready to kind of play this wonderful little tango with Mother Miranda in order to survive this section. She deals good damage, but all of the attacks are properly well telegraphed. You can get out of the way. She feels fair. I think she's relatively well weighted for endgame. You know, you can't just take a Magnum and just grind her down. She will take some pretty serious bullet spongy to get in there and kill her. So in that sense, this is why she gets number 4. I just needed a little bit more of her at the beginning. Just a little bit more to really cement the danger and sprinkle her out just a little bit more throughout. And now for number 3, we've got Lady D, Lady Dimitrescu, big titty vampire lady. The lady who is 9'6", I believe, and shattered the internet for months. This poor woman just, I mean, Capcom must have known a little bit what they were doing. So, like, to me, one of the reasons why she deserves number 3 is because of, first of all, the lead up. The entire first few hours of the game, she is on you. Her daughters are attacking you. She's attacking you. She's chasing you through the castle. You know, she's not quite as effective as Mr. X, but there's still, she really wants to kill you, very clearly. Every time you kill one of her daughters, she reacts. There are emotional stakes that are kind of like building up slowly but surely through the castle. You know, when she calls Cassandra, nobody shows up. Then she freaks out, says something along the lines of, the entire bloodline of House Dimitrescu has been wiped out by the likes of you. You can feel the anger, and this, to me, it's as much as the direction and design as it is the voice acting. Just very, very well done. and you can feel kind of this tension rise and rise and rise, and it ultimately comes to a head with her boss fight. To me, her boss transformation was also easily the most surprising. All of a sudden, you know, you stab her, you see her eyes go bloodshot, and I was really thinking like, oh no, you've got to be kidding, that can't be just it. And then all of a sudden, a dragon bursts out of the tower, and you have to fight it. I remember my jaw dropping the first time, and this is really just the true spectacle of the thing is really, to me, truly important, because if you want to fight a boss, you want to feel like you're going up against completely overwhelming odds. So to me, this was the moment where all of a sudden you are literally, in essence, this knight trying to slay a dragon. The monster looks like a giant, mutated, horrifying dragon, and the taunts, she is so vocal, you can feel the hate that she has. Out of all of the bosses here, I think this is really the one that you can feel the hate dripping off of her. Mother Miranda, there's a little bit more of this desperation, really talking about getting her daughter back. Moreau is the desperate need for love from Mother Miranda. Hessenberg was this confident arrogance, but Lady Dimitrescu is hate. She hates you. She will rip you apart. And so the tension here is real. She and you are about to go. Whoever's gonna come out is going to die. And that, to me, it's those stakes that really bring Lady Dimitrescu up to the top three. Because to me, the characterization is there. It is spooky. You feel the stress as she is chasing you. The arena is claustrophobic but manageable. There are good sections. I mean, the only section that I wouldn't really be a huge fan of is when she flies away and releases her bugs, but you've earned the sniper at that point. If you shoot her in the head once or twice, that will cut that area short. So there are ways to move around and operate the kind of more irritating parts of this boss. Very well designed, and I think very much deserving number 3. And number 2 is Sturm. Storm, to me, is the best, the single best mini-boss that personally I have seen in a Resident Evil game. The reason for that is he's well established during the level beforehand. Now, this is nothing new, but what I like about that is that fundamentally, this is an enemy that you know. This is a mini-boss that you know, that you have stakes with, and you are also afraid of. This is someone that literally, if he catches you, you're dead. Game over, bada bing, bada boom, you know, gabagoo. You're done. It doesn't matter. The damage and the fear that this guy has, the damage and the fear that this guy causes you is incredible. Also, when you open the door and he charges through at you, crashing through walls, to me, it's this wall mechanic that to me really makes Storm the best mini-boss. And the reason for that is you are the one that dictates what the boss arena looks like. You can let him run around and smash and destroy all the walls and keep it open, and if you do that, you've got a lot of room to maneuver, but also in the second phase when he's on fire, that also means there's no defense against his fire attacks, the flamethrower type of aspect. So you are able to kind of have this agency, which doesn't happen in a lot of boss fights, and especially not mini boss fights. Apart from that kind of like steel container in the corner, everything can be destroyed. You can make it a completely open arena, or you can make it a small arena. And of course, the actual, weakness on the boss fight, there's nothing new about that. There's nothing particularly terrifying or interesting about, oh, you've got to side hop and shoot him in the back. But to me, it's the agency of creating your own arena I find absolutely fascinating, and not to mention, this is a real skill check. This is a real skill check. You've just been through the factory. You should, you've gotten through the panzers, the jet, the soldats. We've gotten through all of this. And yet Storm still feels like a real challenge. There's not a mismatch between the area and this mini-boss. There's a real feeling of accomplishment when I saw him go down for the first time. And that, to me, is the hallmark of a really great boss or mini-boss experience. Is the second you watch him go down, you can feel kind of that sigh of relief, and you feel that accomplishment, and that's what Storm gave me. And number one, who else could it be but Donna Beneviento? For me, this was... The entire Beneviento house is kind of what I'm encompassing under the boss fight. Mostly because there's only about a hallway between the actual kind of like boss fight where you kill Donna Beneviento and the baby horrifying section in the basement. This was so well conceived. I mean, as we know, Resident Evil, apart from 7, its mainline series has kind of drifted a little bit away from horror, as did this game at moments. But this was the real moment where they were like, listen, this is a survival horror game. You've survived, now here's the horror. The whole idea of going through all of your possessions that you had with Mia, including stuff that if you'd explored the house at the very prologue of the game that you would recognize, there's this feeling of unease that slowly seeps into your bone. Your bones, rather, my mistake, I don't know, or, just a bone. I don't know if, your tibia is particularly, susceptible to fear, but there's this entire feeling that there's something wrong, and there's this pressure that builds very slowly. Very, very slowly, especially as you initially walk in. There's no one there, nothing there, not much to really even interact with. But then when you get down to the basement, same thing. A lot of closed doors, a lot of silence. To me, it's the quietness that gets it. But then you hear a little bit of music coming from down the hallway. You walk down a long hallway, which is never a good move when you're in a horror game. It's always a bad shout. But you keep going, you keep listening, you keep walking, and then all of a sudden, you walk in, your gun, all of your items are taken from you, and there is a doll of your wife, dead, shot, murdered, well, not murdered, but that's what we think. Just laying there. Just sitting there. And then you have to rip her apart. So there's just these layers of fucked upness, of these moments where you're just kind of like, what is happening? When you're trying to get the puzzle is incredible. I mean, all the puzzles are incredible, but like, the music box puzzle is fascinating. Where you have to pick off your wedding ring and it's covered in blood. I mean, they're just layers and layers and layers of horror. And that's even before the giant, horrible, monstrous baby fetus shows up and starts chasing you. So there's this whole feeling of tension that's building, 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 building. And then when you finally get into the elevator and go up and the baby is, screaming at you, going like, yummy, like all these horrible, horrible sounds. Then the boss fight is a race against the time to search through this house, to murder the doll before the dolls murder you, as all the dolls start shaking. It is essentially what is tantamount to an hour or two of unbridled tension, discomfort, and fear. And real fear that I haven't felt in a Resident Evil game in a very, very long time. So it's this entire experience and the seamlessness of this ghost house, which is why, for me, Donna Beneviento gets my number one pick for Resident Evil 8 bosses. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for making it this far. It would mean the absolute world to me if you would hit that like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, as you know, all of these are just my opinion. I'd be more than happy to discuss them in the comments down below. But I wish you a very, very good day. Do not hesitate to join the Neutral Army. And this is Sergeant Neutral, signing out.